The year was 1867, and the high plains stretched endless and empty, a sea of grass where the wind sang mournful hymns. The Hayes Ranch stood solitary on that ocean of land, its weathered boards bleached gray by sun and storm. To the east, the Cimarron cut a dark line through the earth, swollen from spring rains. To the west, the horizon burned with the last light of day, smoldering orange behind low black ridges. Inside the house, Clara Hayes moved with the steady rhythm of necessity. She was not yet 30, but sorrow had carved shadows into her face. Her husband lay 3 years in the ground, felled by fever, and since that day she had kept the ranch alive by sheer grit. She rose before dawn, mended fences, drove cattle, stacked hay, and at night she stitched clothes by lamplight while her 2 children slept. Tonight, though, something unsettled her. She could feel it in the stillness. Even the crickets had gone silent. Her boy, Daniel, 10 years old, was whittling a stick near the hearth. Her little girl, Ruth, just 6, was braiding scraps of cloth into a doll's dress. Clara forced a smile at them. Though her pulse had begun to quicken, she moved to the window and pushed the curtain back a finger's width. Far on the ridgeline, black against the dying sun, shapes shifted. Horsemen, 6, maybe 7. She couldn't yet make out faces, but she didn't need to. No decent man came riding at dusk in a pack, steering straight for an isolated homestead. She dropped the curtain, set her jaw, and whispered a single word, "Raiders." Daniel's eyes widened. He had heard stories in town. Families burned out, women dragged away, men shot where they stood. Ruth clutched her doll, lip trembling. Clara crouched and took them both by the shoulders. "Listen to me," she said, voice low but sharp. "Go to the cellar. Quiet now. Stay until I call." Daniel swallowed hard. "What about you, Ma?" "I'll keep them out," she said. "Go." They obeyed. The trapdoor creaked shut. Alone in the sudden hush, Clara reached for the shotgun that stood by the door. The wood was worn smooth from years of use, the steel cold against her palm. She poured powder with steady hands, though her heart hammered in her chest. Outside, the hoofbeats carried on the wind, slow, deliberate, growing louder. A dog barked once, then fell silent with a yelp. Clara's breath caught. They were close. The last light drained from the sky. Darkness gathered. The raiders were almost upon her. The first sound was the crunch of boots on gravel, then a voice like gravel itself. "Evening, Mrs. Heard, tell you're all alone out here." Clara didn't answer. She stood behind the door, finger on the trigger. Another voice higher, mocking. "Ain't polite to keep guests waiting. Maybe she needs coaxin'." Laughter followed, coarse and cruel. Then glass shattered. A rock crashed through the window, spraying shards across the floor. Clara flinched but did not fire. "Come on out, darlin'," the gravel voice drawled. "We ain't meaning no harm, long as you're friendly." The men outside chuckled, the sound of wolves circling. Clara's mind raced. If she fired too soon, they'd storm the place, and she had only so much powder and shot. She needed to make every blast count. Then came the thud of boots against the door. Once, twice, the hinges groaned. The third kick split the wood. Clara raised the shotgun. "Get out," she said. A pause, then a rasp of steel as someone drew a knife. "Or what, missus?" The answer thundered from her gun. The blast lit the room in firelight. A man screamed outside, fell hard. Shouts erupted, wild and furious. The door shuddered under blows. Clara rammed powder, ramrod shot. Her hands moved on instinct. The raiders answered with bullets. Glass shattered again, lead torn to walls, which splintered like dry bones. Clara dropped low, firing through the doorway. Another yell, another body down. But there were too many. Boots crashed against the door until the frame splintered. One man shoved his arm through, groping for the latch. Clara swung the butt of her gun hard, shattering his wrist. He howled. Smoke thickened, stinging her eyes. Gunpowder filled her lungs. Somewhere below, in the cellar, she could hear Ruth whimpering. Daniel whispered to her, trying to hush her. Clara's muscles trembled. sweat stinging her brow. She couldn't hold them forever. And then, a crash from the barn. Shouts turned to confusion. A figure burst through the storm of gunfire. He came like a shadow flung into flame. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a soldier's swiftness. His rifle cracked once, twice. 2 raiders fell in the dirt before they knew what hit them. The others cursed, spinning to face this new threat. He waded into them with steel and fury, driving a knife into one man's gut, smashing another across the jaw with his rifle butt. Clara, stunned, watched him cut through the pack like a man with nothing left to lose. One raider scrambled onto his horse, spurred hard, vanishing into the dark. Another fired wild shots as he staggered back, then fell, blood soaking his shirt. The stranger didn't stop until the yard lay silent save for groans of the dying. Smoke from Clara's barrel mingled with his. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of the wind and the pounding of her own heart. He turned then, face half shadowed by the lamplight spilling through the doorway. His hair was dark, matted with sweat, his jaw rough with days of stubble. His coat hung torn, soaked in someone's blood, and his eyes, cold, sharp, weary beyond measure, fixed on Clara as if to gauge whether she was threat or salvation. She raised her gun again, hand shaking. "Who are you?" she demanded. He didn't flinch. He lowered his rifle slow, deliberate. His voice was low, hoarse from dust and smoke. "Name's Elias. I was just passing through. Looks like I'd picked the right night to hole up in your barn." Clara's gaze flicked past him to the bodies in the yard. 6 men down, blood in the dirt. The raiders had been broken, for now, but their leader hadn't been among the dead. They would be back. "You were hiding on my land?" she asked, anger trembling through her fear. Elias gave a humorless half-smile. "Better than dying on the trail." He pressed a hand to his side, where blood seeped between his fingers. "Looks like I owe you some thanks, missus. We kept each other alive tonight." Clara didn't lower her gun. The children were still below, depending on her. She didn't know this man, didn't know what sins he carried. A drifter in the barn, armed and wounded. He could be outlaw as much as savior. "Don't mistake this for trust," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You can stay till dawn, but when the sun comes up, you'll answer for why you're here." Elias nodded once grim. "Fair enough, but you'd best be ready. They'll be back when the light does. And when they come, it won't be for cattle or coin. It'll be for you." His words settled in the room like a curse. Clara felt them in her bones. She lowered her gun at last, not in trust but in grim acknowledgement. The horizon beyond the ridges was already dark as pitch. And somewhere out there, the rest of the raiders were gathering. Clara drew a long, shuddering breath. The fight was not over. It had only begun. The wind rose fierce after midnight, carrying with it the rattle of loose boards and the far-off cry of coyotes. In the Hayes ranch house, the lamplight flickered low, throwing long, jagged shadows across the floorboards. Clara Hayes sat at the table, shotgun resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door as if she could hold it shut. Across from her, the stranger, Elias, leaned against the wall, pressing a rag against the wound in his side. His shirt was soaked crimson, though he seemed to pay it no mind. His gaze stayed steady, cold, as though pain were nothing more than a nuisance. The children had crept back from the cellar, curling together by the hearth. Daniel, his small jaw clenched like a man grown too fast, sat upright beside his sister, knife clutched in his hand as if he might use it. Ruth had finally fallen asleep, thumb tucked in her mouth, her head on Daniel's shoulder. Clara's chest tightened at the sight. "They'll be back," Elias muttered. His voice was low, almost lost beneath the moan of the wind. Clara's eyes flicked to him. "How can you be so sure?" "Men like that don't leave a job half done," he said. "You embarrass them tonight. Blood for blood. That's how they'll think. And they'll bring more when the dawn comes." The words made her stomach clench. She'd seen the rage in those raiders' eyes, heard it in their curses. She knew Elias was right. "Why were you in my barn?" she asked, her voice sharp to cover the fear edging in. His eyes lingered on the flame dancing in the lamp glass. "Had nowhere else to go. Rode too far without food, too long without water. Needed cover." That's no answer, she snapped. He looked at her then, and for the first time there was something in his gaze beyond coldness. Something haunted. You really want to know, missus? Clara kept her chin high, though her hands trembled against the wood of the shotgun. If you're under my roof, I'll have the truth. Elias gave a humorless chuckle. The truth is, I'm a deserter. Union scout. Saw enough men die to last 3 lifetimes. Saw women and children caught in the fire, too. One night, I put my rifle down and walked away. Since then, I've been riding with no direction, hiding in barns, keeping clear of law and outlaws alike. Clara stared at him. The fire popped, a sharp crack that made her flinch. She studied his face, the lines carved deep, the eyes dark with memory. This was a man broken by what he'd seen. Yet tonight, he had saved her children. You expect me to believe you? She asked quietly. Don't matter if you do, he said, voice flat. By sunrise, either them raiders kill us all or we kill them. That's the only truth worth worrying over. The wind howled again, and in that sound Clara heard it. The creak of saddle leather, faint but steady. Her heart lurched. She pushed to her feet and crossed the window. Shapes moved out there in the darkness. More than before, wolves circling closer. The raiders struck again just before dawn. The first sign was the whistle of something through the air, then the crash of a burning bottle against the wall. Fire licked up the boards, snapping and hissing. Smoke billowed fast. Down! Elias barked. He shoved Clara aside just as a second bottle burst through the window, flames spreading across the floor. Ruth screamed. Daniel pulled her back, and Clara stamped at the fire with a blanket. Gunfire cracked from outside. Bullets punched through walls, ripping planks apart. Clara snatched a shotgun and fired blind through the window. A cry followed. Elias was already at the door, rifle braced, firing quick, sharp shots that dropped 2 men in the yard. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. A raider hurled himself against it. Would split. The man forced his way in, a pistol raised. Clara spun and fired. The blast flung him back, chest torn open, his body crashing against a table before slumping lifeless to the floor. The children screamed again, but Clara couldn't stop to comfort them. Her hands shook as she reloaded, the acrid stink of powder burning her lungs. Her stomach churned. She had killed a man. His blood seeped across her floorboards. Elias glanced at her, a grim nod. Better his blood than yours. Outside, the raiders shouted, spurred to fury. A dozen voices now. Clara felt her knees weaken. They couldn't hold against so many. They'll burn us out, Elias said, reloading with calm precision. We need to push them back or we're done. Clara's mind whirled. The barn, the hay stacked high. An idea formed, risky, desperate. If we light the barn, we can blind him, force him off balance. Elias gave her a hard look. You'll lose the barn, maybe the stock. It's that or lose everything, Clara snapped. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, spoken like someone who means to live. He kicked the door wide and charged out, firing into the dawnlit yard. Clara followed, shotgun braced. Flames roared higher as the barn caught. Black smoke coiled into sky. The raiders cursed. Horses shrieked. Chaos spreading in the half-light. 2 riders came straight at Clara. She fired, reloaded, fired again. One toppled from the saddle. The other veered away, horse screaming. She stumbled, ears ringing, eyes burning with smoke. Elias fought like a man possessed, rifle snapping, knife flashing. The yard was a blur of fire and blood. Clara lost count of how many fell. Then a raider broke past, stormed into the house. Daniel screamed toward the morning. Clara spun, heart seizing. She charged after him, bursting through the doorway just as the raider loomed over her children, his gun raised. She didn't think. She fired. The blast filled the room. The man dropped where he stood. Clara's breath hitched. The children clung to her, sobbing. She held them tight, though her hands trembled violently. Her body shook, her heart thundered, but something fierce had lit inside her. She wasn't just a widow with children anymore. She was a fighter. The raiders fled at last, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead in the dirt. Smoke drifted over the yard, acrid and heavy, the barn collapsing on itself, flames devouring what had once been their store of hay. The cattle bawled in terror, penned but restless. Clara stood in the doorway, shotgun dangling at her side. Her dress was scorched, her hair tangled, her face smeared with soot. Her chest rose and fell in heavy gasps. Elias leaned against the porch post, his wound bleeding fresh, his face pale but unbowed. "You held your own," he said, voice low. Clara didn't answer. She couldn't tear her eyes from the carnage. The bodies in the yard, the blood soaking the dirt where children once played. Ruth whimpered at her skirts. Daniel's jaw was set hard, but his eyes were wide, too old for his years. Clara knelt, cupped their faces in her hands. "You're safe," she whispered. "That's what matters." But even as she said it, a new dread crept in. They had fought off 2 waves, but Elias had been right. Men like those didn't forgive or forget. They would come back with more. And then, in the silence that followed, Clara's thoughts turned to something else, something darker. How had the raiders known she was alone here? Ranches dotted the land for miles. Why hers? Why now? She turned to Elias, suspicion flickering like flame. "They knew I was alone. Someone told them." His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. Could have been men in town talking. Could have been someone who wanted what you got. Her grip on the shotgun tightened. Or it could have been you. His eyes met hers, steady as stone. "If it was me, missus, I'd be riding with M instead of standing here bleeding for you." She searched his face, but found no answer in those shadowed eyes. Still, the seed of doubt had taken root. Elias straightened, wincing as he pressed his wound. "Don't waste your fear on me. Save it for the men riding back come sunrise." Clara looked past him to the ridges dark against the early light. She felt the truth of his words settle heavy in her chest. The fight was not done. It had only sharpened. Behind her, the children clung tighter. Before her, the stranger waited, half ally, half mystery. Between them all lay the blood-soaked earth of the frontier, and the promise of another battle yet to come. The dawn was brighter now, painting the sky in red and gold. But to Clara Hayes, it felt like the color of fire and blood. The first rays of morning crept across the prairie, painting the horizon in blood-red light. Smoke from the burned barn hung heavy in the air, twisting into the sky like the ghost of what had been lost. The Hayes ranch stood battered but unbroken, its boards splintered and scarred by bullets, the windows jagged teeth of shattered glass. Inside, Clara Hayes tightened the strap of her late husband's revolver across her waist, the leather worn and cracked, but steady against her hip. Her fingers trembled as she cinched it, though she willed them not to. The children were watching. Daniel stood in the doorway, jaw set, his eyes too old for his 10 years. Ruth clung to her ragged doll, cheeks streaked with soot, her gaze fixed on her mother, as if she were the only wall left standing between them and ruin. Clara met their eyes and tried to offer a smile, though it did not reach her heart. Elias leaned against the wall, pale from blood loss but still upright. He had rewrapped his wound with a strip of his coat, though the stain spread through, dark and wet. He checked the rifle in his hands, his movement slow but deliberate. Every click of the mechanism sounded heavy, final. "They'll come hard this time," he said, his voice rough. "Leader's still out there. A man like that won't ride away without making his mark." Clara nodded. She had felt it deep in her bones since the moment the first raider shadowed the ridgeline. This wasn't a simple raid for cattle or coin. It was vengeance now, the kind that burned hotter than fire. She stepped out onto the porch. The prairie stretched wide and endless, golden under the rising sun. For a moment, it almost seemed peaceful. Then she saw them, dark specks cresting the ridge, growing larger as they rode down. Not 6 this time, not 10, at least 15, maybe more. Horses thundered, dust rising like storm clouds, the sun flashing on gun barrels and steel. Her heart pounded. She tightened her grip on the shotgun. Behind her, the children whimpered. Elias stepped up beside her, rifle braced across his good arm. His face was carved from stone, but his voice was quiet. "When it starts, you keep low. Don't waste a shot." Clara's breath caught. And if they break through? He looked at her then, eyes dark, unreadable. Then you do what you did last night. You fight till there ain't no breath left. The words settled heavy in her chest. She thought of her husband, how he used to say that life on the frontier was a war fought in silence, one day at a time. Now the silence had shattered, and the war had come screaming to her doorstep. The raiders drew close, their leader riding at the front. He was a giant of a man, shoulders broad as a bull, a scar carving his face from brow to chin. His voice carried across the yard, deep and raw. You think you can kill my men and live, he bellowed. We'll burn your house to ash. We'll take your brats and string you up for crows. Clara's blood turned cold, but she stood tall on the porch, shotgun raised. Her voice cracked the air like a whip. You'll find no cowards here. The leader's grin was pure malice. He spurred his horse, and with a roar the raiders charged. The world exploded in thunder. Clara fired, the recoil jarring her shoulder. A rider tumbled from his saddle. Elias's rifle snapped, dropping another, but the wave did not falter. Hooves tore up the earth. Bullets screamed through the air. What splintered around her, glass shattered behind. She ducked low, reloaded, fired again. Her ears rang. Her lungs burned with smoke. The raiders circled, firing from horseback. One broke through, leaping onto the porch with a knife. Clara swung the shotgun like a club, the stock cracking against his jaw. He reeled back, but another came from the side. Elias lunged, his knife flashing, burying it deep into the man's throat. Blood sprayed, hot and vile, as the raider collapsed across the steps. More poured in. The yard became a blur of fire and chaos. Clara caught sight of Daniel at the window, firing her husband's old pistol with hands that shook but eyes that blazed. Ruth crouched behind him, covering her ears, tears streaking her face. A scream cut the air. A horse buckling, a man crushed beneath it. Clara fired again, the blast lighting the porch in white fire. Her body ached, her arms shook, but she fought on, driven by a fury she had never known. And still the leader came, cutting through the fray like a beast unleashed. His revolver cracked, the shot grazing Elias's shoulder, spinning him back with a grunt of pain. Clara turned, heart seizing. Elias staggered but stayed upright, rifle snapping again. The leader roared, spurring his horse straight at the porch. Clara braced, eyes narrowing. This was the storm breaking, the moment where everything would be decided. The leader leapt from his horse in a spray of dirt, landing heavy on the porch. He was massive up close, his shadow swallowing Clara whole. His revolver gleamed black in the smoke-stained morning. "End of the line, missus," he growled. "I'll take your brats first, then finish you slow." Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She lifted the shotgun, but he was faster. His hand slammed the barrel aside, the blast roaring harmless into the air. His fist crashed against her cheek, sending her sprawling across the boards. Pain flared white. Blood filled her mouth. She gasped, vision swimming, but she forced herself to rise. Her children's cries rang out behind her. She saw Daniel with a pistol raised, hands trembling. "No!" she shouted. The leader turned, sneering, and backhanded the boy hard. Daniel fell, the pistol skittering across the floor. Ruth screamed, clinging to her brother. Clara's heart broke and hardened in the same breath. She pushed to her knees, eyes blazing. "You'll not touch them," she hissed. The leader laughed, a deep, cruel sound. "Who's going to stop me?" "You." "Yes," she said. Her hand shot to her husband's revolver at her hip. The leather strap tore free. She drew, the steel cold but steady in her grip. The leader swung his revolver toward her, but she fired first. The shot cracked like thunder, the recoil jolting through her arm. The bullet struck deep, slamming into his chest. His eyes went wide, shock etched across that scarred face. For a heartbeat he stood, wavering, then collapsed hard against the boards. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged cries of the children. Smoke drifted, the air heavy with gunpowder and blood. The raiders still alive saw their leader fall. Fear rippled through them. One by one they broke, spurring their horses, vanishing across the prairie, leaving the dead where they lay. Clara stood frozen, revolver trembling in her hand. She stared down at the lifeless body at her feet, her breath coming hard. She had killed before this night, but this was different. This was a man who had destroyed everything she had left, and she had stopped him. Behind her, Daniel crawled to his knees, clutching Ruth close. Elias staggered onto porch, face pale, blood darkening his shirt. His eyes met hers, and for once there was no shadow in them, only a kind of fierce respect. "You did it," he said hoarsely. Clara's arm dropped, the revolver slipping from her fingers. She swayed, knees buckling, but Elias caught her before she fell. His grip was weak, trembling, yet steady enough to hold her upright. Together they stood over the body of the raider leader, the dawn brightening around them, painting the sky in fire and gold. Clara drew a long breath. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the weight of her own strength. She had stood against darkness and not faltered. The children clung to her, Elias steady at her side. They were bloodied, battered, scarred, but alive. In the quiet that followed, the narrator's voice seemed to drift on the wind, low and solemn. The frontier was never a place of peace. It was a forge. It took the broken, the lonely, the desperate, and it burned them into steel. Clara Hayes had been a widow, a mother clinging to what little she had. But when the fire came, she stood. And in standing, she found not just survival, but strength. The prairie stretched endless before them, smoke rising from the ruined barn, the bodies of the fallen strewn across the yard. Clara Hayes stood tall, rifle in hand, children at her side, a wounded drifter beside her. The war was not over, not in the land, not in her heart, but she had faced a storm and lived. And sometimes, out on that unforgiving frontier, that was victory enough.